Between the recent Escape from Tarkov debacle and now Helldivers 2, the past few weeks have seen some really good examples of consumers pushing back against bad business practices in the game industry. On May 3rd, Arrowhead Studios announced that Helldivers 2 would be activating a requirement for players to have to sign into a PlayStation account to continue playing the game. This was a requirement that was waived at launch due to technical issues, but was always intended to be reinstated once the game stabilized. The announcement was met with immediate frustration from PC players who didn't want to be forced into creating a PlayStation account, many citing security concerns with giving their information to Sony, who has been notoriously bad about keeping people's data secure. Of course, PC players in general, myself included, are easily frustrated by having multiple sign-ins required just to play the game we bought. Yes, I'm looking at you, Ubisoft and EA. The situation was exacerbated once it was revealed that following the sign-in requirement returning, Helldivers 2 had suddenly been delisted from over 100 countries without warning, despite people having already purchased the game in many of these territories. Due to the PlayStation Network not being available in many of these countries, the sign-in requirement would mean that they could no longer play the game they had already paid for. Negative reviews on Steam quickly started pouring in for Helldivers 2, detesting the new requirement that most players had no idea was coming, despite being listed on the Steam page since launch. Nobody ever looks at those little details on the page, so you can't really blame players for ignoring that it was there, and Arrowhead did little to promote that this change was coming in-game. It was an unfortunate moment for a game that has really done everything right so far. The communication with the player base has been excellent, the updates have been frequent, and the in-game monetization has stayed unobtrusive and fair. Arrowhead Studios' CEO and creative director, Johan Pilstedt, has stated his intention for the studio to make the best live service game yet. As someone that has put close to 100 hours into the game already and is absolutely loving it, I'd say the studio is well on its way, and its handling of this unforced error by Sony only solidifies that for me. I could use this video to go into why I think Sony made this decision, and why anyone with experience with the PC player base could tell you it was going to go down the way it did. But I'd rather analyze how Arrowhead handled it because I find that far more interesting. In case you don't know, Arrowhead Studios is not owned by Sony. They are a completely independent studio, and Helldivers 2 is published by Sony. Pilstedt understands this, and as the negative reviews for Helldivers 2 continued pouring in, it was clear that the studio was using that as leverage to push Sony to reverse their decision. Arrowhead very quickly took the reins on the situation to make sure that people directed their complaints to Sony, as the sign-in requirement was a decision completely out of Arrowhead's control. Pilstedt put himself in the crosshairs for the public's discontent, and made sure to communicate directly with the game's player base, adding a much-needed human element to the situation. He didn't dramatize the situation or try to inflame things further. He just made it very clear that it was partially his fault for not communicating this upcoming requirement better, and that Sony ultimately has the final say on things, so to direct the pressure there if they wanted something to change. Second, Arrowhead's community managers leaned into players' negative reviews on the game's Steam page. This gave them a more public outlet to voice their concerns that Sony couldn't just ignore, as hundreds of thousands of negative reviews poured in. This tanked the game's overwhelmingly positive rating to overwhelmingly negative literally overnight. Neither the community managers nor Pilstedt gave any air to the bad actors trying to capitalize on the situation for their own personal gain on social media. They kept their player base under control, removed those who were there just to attack the devs and the community managers, and focused their attention on an actionable item, rather than just yelling into the void that is social media. Removing those bad actors is essential in keeping people focused on the goal, and not allowing them to hijack it with their own petty grievances. By the evening of May 5th, Sony had reversed the decision on the sign-in requirement for Helldivers 2, and the user review score has since quickly flipped around, with many reversing their previously negative review to voice their pleasure with having been heard. Not only that, but Arrowhead has taken the situation in stride, and even looking at making a cape for the game to commemorate the community taking a stand and putting a check on Sony as a publisher of Helldivers 2. With a community as big and passionate as Helldivers 2's, this could have easily been a situation that got completely out of control, but I'm really impressed with how Arrowhead Studios handled it. I think it's a testament to the game itself, which relies on the entire community working together to achieve goals, that they were able to quickly translate this into a positive force outside of the game. Game publishers meddling in successful games has happened all too often, so seeing Arrowhead and the community putting a check on that overreach in a mostly positive way was really exciting to see, and that could have only happened with a game developer and their community in lockstep coordination with one another. We still don't know when or if the game will be relisted in the countries it was removed from, but I imagine that will be reversed as well by the time this video airs due to the sign-in requirement being removed. It's early still for Arrowhead's newfound success, so things could change down the line, but so far all I've seen from the studio is a commitment to keeping their players happy and making it clear to Sony that they know what they're doing. Now the question is if this sets a precedent going forward for Sony and their games on PC. Sucker Punch, the developers of Ghost of Tsushima, saw the blowback Helldivers 2 was receiving and preemptively warned players that the sign-in would only be required for its Legends multiplayer mode, and not the single-player portion of the game. Does Sony take the lesson from Helldivers 2 and make sure to not end up in the same rocky situation again? By the time this video is out, we might have had our answer.